I think it's getting the confidence. Like you said, they've already been there. So them it's like a no-brainer, right? Like, oh, you got this. No problem at all. I'm here for you, buddy. Like it's there's no problem at all for them. Whereas for us, for me, is like brand new thing. I was stuck because I felt like I had enough knowledge to take down a 20 unit property, but not enough knowledge to take down a 50 unit property. And I was, my mentality was, I'll make my own mistakes first, my own money, before I use investors' money, which may have hurt me in the very beginning, and it is what it is. But I was a little more risk averse, and I knew that if I wanted to take on bigger properties, which I wanted to, I had to get a mentor involved. And my underwriting model had glaring errors, like formula errors, and it was bad. I'm like, this is never to happen ever again. I can't ever underwrite with this model. So I found your model actually through a friend of mine, and then kind of went down a rabbit hole to the mentoring program. So, but that when I was making mistakes with my model, and when I knew I had to learn more with other people and get a mentor involved, that's where I knew I had to change some things.
So let's talk about, you didn't want to raise money earlier on. You wanted to use your own money. And that's a very common thing, especially if you have your own money. You're like, well, let me lose my own money first, And I always say, well, you shouldn't lose anyone's money. You, you should educate yourself. You should have a strong team. You should not lose any money at all. And that's literally my counter argument to that. Oh, let me lose my own money first. What were some, so maybe that was something that maybe held you back a little bit. You're like, oh, I'm just use my own money. Obviously, you're not buying a 100-unit property if you're just using your own money for what. So that was one thing that you were maybe struggling with. What else maybe were you struggling with before you joined the mentoring?
Yeah, I mean, raising capital was one of those. I was struggling with really how to underwrite the right way. I mean, that was one of because I'm a very analytical kind of a guy, very numbers oriented, very detail oriented, over analytical at times. And I feel like learning the underwriting model was so important to know the grasp of the whole numbers and how the whole deal works. But even more than that was learning how the whole syndication process works. Like, how do you put a deal together, how you do the due diligence, very important, how you asset manage a property, how you find partners and team members. So I think learning the whole entire structure was very valuable. But the underwriting is so important. I think of all the skills you have to know, I think you must know underwriting. Whether you're going to do it or not, you got to know how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk about mentoring for a second. It's been my experience when every time I have not had a mentor and advisor, things have gone badly for me because I felt like I'm a smart guy. I can figure stuff out, and I normally can, but I make massive mistakes in the process. Things take a lot longer. Conversely, when I have a mentor who has already done what I want to do, in the mentor's mind, what I want to do is fairly simple, very straightforward. I've done it. You can do it. And I'm like, I'm not sure I can. What difference has working with a mentor made for you? Obviously, one is underwriting skills. There's no question. I'm reading that, and that's a skill you can learn very, very quickly. But what are some of the other differences that working with a full-time syndicator has made for you?
I think it's getting the confidence. Like you said, they've already been there. So them it's like a no-brainer, right? Like, oh, you got this. No problem at all. I'm here for you, buddy. Like there's no problem at all for them. Whereas for us, for me, is like brand new thing. Like going from 4 units to 20 was a big jump, right? Go from 20 to 70 was like huge. But to them, it's like, oh, they're doing 150 plus all day long. No big deal. So just getting that comfortability factor with the mentors and knowing that you can run all these things past them and have them fact check your underwriting models and give you advice. They've already been there, several times years ago. Just having that confidence was, I think it's hugely important. For a new person, you don't have that confidence yet. So I always tell people, like, having a mentor gives you confidence, shortens the learning curve, limits the mistakes. It's a win. Yeah.
Oh, you say confidence, and the same thing is you got to believe you can do something, right? If you can't believe you can do something, why would you ever take a step in that direction, right? You got to have at least an ounce of belief that it can be done. You might not have all the details, but you got to believe, right? And a lot of people are held up by that because they can't believe it can be done. And I think, to me, mentors and advisors give me that ingredient that allows me to move forward. I don't have all the answers, but this person somehow is confident in my ability to do something, even though I'm not. Why is that? It happened over and over in my life, and it sounds like it made a big difference for you as well. You're like, maybe I can bite off this larger property. Maybe I can raise some money. And how did you overcome the ability to raise money? A lot of people are stuck in, I can't raise money. I've never done money, raised money before. And I certainly don't want to ask my friends and family for the reason you mentioned before. God forbid I'll lose their money. You know, how did you overcome the fear of raising money or the potential losing someone else's money?
Well, I think to answer your question, I have to kind of start a little before that. So, I knew I was really numbers oriented and detail driven. So when I did my first syndication, I chose to work with two partners that I'd known for a long time. And we all three banded up like, oh, we're going to buy this property. It's about 70 units out in Indiana here. And, we're going to divvy up our responsibilities. So I'll do the underwriting. I'll find the deal, underwrite it. And then you go do capital raise. And then your team members are going to help with asset management. So yeah, we got three-legged stool here. So we go out there, we go to closing, and we're about 2 weeks before closing. And we realize our $1.4 million raise, we have about 1 million raised so far. And we get the closing and we're still at $1 million. And I realized right then that I needed to learn capital raise and do it. And I had to make a bridge loan on the property personally to get us through closing, right? And it was multiple six figures, and I wasn't very happy with that, but I learned a lesson there and got it done, got paid back, of course. And when I finished that close and that deal, this is back in December of this past year, I immediately went and got some resources to learn how to capital raise, and I immediately put it into action. And I decided I was going to form my own company, Focus Capital, and I'm going to go out and learn capital raise. I'm going to get a deal. It's a small one. I'm going to prove I can do it. So I went and found a $1.2 million asset to raise $400,000. I did it in 7 phone calls. I said, all right, I can do this. Let's go. So I think for me for years, I kind of flew under the radar. I didn't really want people to know what I was doing, just being kind of passive about it, just do my own thing. This is kind of how I am by nature. I realized you've got to let people know what you're doing or they're not gonna know how to invest with you. You have to get the word out there, right? So that's kind of how I got into my capital raise journey. But once I realized I could do it, now it's wow, people actually love to invest in real estate. They love to have the opportunity.
Now, do you have partners moving forward, or what is your view on partners right now?
Yeah, I think partners are great as long as you have complementary skill sets. I think if you've got partners that you kind of are all, visionaries, kind of like the EOS model, then maybe you kind of have too many cooks in the kitchen kind of thing. I think that you're not going to get a lot done efficiently. So I do still have partners on other deals. Our path moving forward is building out a local team here, which we're growing. And then I also will have some partners on some deals going forward strictly for capital raise.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think you mentioned a few things that are critical. One is defining your roles and responsibilities very carefully. I mean, the way you had it in your previous partnership actually works pretty well. I'm going to do the deals. You're going to raise the capital. And so now you know who's accountable. So that's very important, number one. But number two, it doesn't mean that you as a deal finder shouldn't raise money, right? And also, your capital raiser should know how to underwrite deals. It's just that the accountability is different. But I think it's a good point. To be a well-rounded operator, you really need to know all those things. But your accountabilities have to be very precise. Otherwise, it's unclear who's actually accountable for raising the money. And I think that's where I've seen partnerships kind of fall apart when those roles are not cleanly defined.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Yeah, we had a full document of roles and responsibilities all lined out. So, I mean, that was the plan. We had a great plan going forward. It just didn't end up that way. But all in all, I think it was a great learning experience. We're all still friends today. We're still on calls every month. It's still going well. But I learned that for me personally, I've got to have capital raise be the most important thing that I do. Is that for me, I've identified that as being your highest revenue per hour task. Honestly, it is. I think it is. Well, that and finding deals.
Yeah, those two, finding deals and raising capital, right? If you have access to capital, your biggest problem is finding deals. So that becomes your biggest problem, chicken and egg, right? If you're a deal finder, your biggest problem is capital, which is why joint ventures work so well in this business. And I don't know if you were ever used to joint venturing before. I wasn't, right? And in the restaurants or certainly my job and also house flipping. I mean, the idea of partnering with someone was completely foreign. It was just me, right? And maybe a bunch of contractors, but the idea of actually joint venturing with someone was completely foreign to me. And that once we got into the syndication world and figured that out, that was a game changer. And I don't know if that was for you as well, just the idea of actually joint venturing with people.
My third deal, I did a joint venture. I'm sorry, my second deal, my 15-unit deal. A buddy of mine, I know him for years. He actually was in commercial real estate and apartments himself. Was making a change in his life, and he wanted to kind of mentor me in a way to find my first larger deal. So he found me an off-market property, 15 units. We did a joint venture on that deal. I was 80, he was 20. I put up my portion of the capital, him his. So that was the first joint venture, that's what really got me into real estate, honestly. 4-unit, I wouldn't really consider, multifamily really, but yeah, I think they're definitely beneficial. I agree.
So what are your biggest challenges now?
Now my challenge is how do I be a great leader and build a team? Because I know that people is how you scale. And it's implementing EOS, our system, our processes, really figuring out asset management, getting a program for that. Today, our challenges would be finding enough deals that will pencil. We do have one right now that has a nice assumable loan at 3.6%. We're trying to take down. We're currently investing in final. That'd be our biggest deal to date. But I think right now my focus is building a team and being a qualified buyer to these sellers, that want to sell a big deal.
Yeah, so deal flow is obviously a big problem. I mean, if you land that, then your biggest problem will be raising money. It's like this giant ebb and flow. Now, as you're building your team, especially early on, do you partner? Do you bring on partners? Do you bring on employees? Do you bring on 1099s? Where are you right now when you're thinking?
So far, I've got a virtual assistant, which she's 1099. I've got a analyst who is paid in equity right now. I bring on a director of operations next week, or this week actually, 2 days, and she will be an employee. She'll be salary plus equity / bonus. Looking at 2 more hires in the next 6 months, probably acquisitions and then also investor relations. I see what's coming ahead in the next 12 months. We're going to be well prepared for that, but we're going to be mostly employees. I think for me as an owner, it's better to have the employee type role. I can see pros and cons, both to employee to partners, but I think to have, build a great culture in a company, to build just a great alignment with everyone's interests and not have someone distracted to other businesses. I think for me, having employees is better.
Clearly, the problem is early on, how do you pay for it, right? Because your revenue isn't that high. Now, you have the acquisition fees to play with. You might have savings from previous business that you can play with as well. How do you pay for all that? And that's the thing. Normally, you cover the overhead with asset management fees that requires a certain amount of scale, right? Yep. So how are you going to cover the overhead?
Yeah, so great point. So I personally make an investment in the business, to bring in the operations person. It's a bit of a risk, right? I mean, I see what's coming ahead in the next 6 months. I know the next deal we're going to do right now, we'll close on next month. We'll pay for her whole annual salary, but she'll be getting a blend of a base salary plus bonus and equity. But that base salary still is overhead, right?
Yeah.
So, I have a fractional CFO I work with, and we're modeling out our cash flow picture and our comp plan structures the next couple of years. But part of it, Michael, is an investment into the business for myself. If I didn't have that luxury from other business I have, I would probably have to do partnerships, honestly. I probably would, because it wouldn't be cash flow today to cover their salaries. But I feel like since I have that luxury, I can do that to invest in them right now.
And it is a bit of a luxury, just to be clear about that. You have money to invest in the company, but I think it's the best way. And the other way is to bring on partners, right? To do I'm going to bring in a chief underwriter. Like you said, you're going to pay them an equity. They work for free, but they get paid equity. And that's how we got started as well. We just brought in partners, and that worked very well for a number of years until the income of the business allowed us to basically not have to do that anymore. I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, the less partners you have, the better. I mean, that's just you got to slice the pie.
You paying your analyst on equity at 5% on a big deal is like 6 figures. Right?
Oh yeah.
But let's call a spade, right? You go hire an analyst, and locally here as an employee, you'll pay half of that for an entire year for the salary. So it's a business, right? I think starting out, I can see why partners would be a better way to go.